Welcome everyone to another Voices with Vervaeke sorry, I've turned my thing off, but I'm not sure why it's keep dinging. We want to develop in a more shareable format. So hence what we're doing right now. So welcome, Jordan. It's always great to be here with you.
Yeah, it's always great.
I like this particular translation. Jesus recommending that we be passers-by, that we be in the world, but not of the world. As lurking behind it, the Nietzschean criticism of Christianity being a kind of Platonic hatred of the body and the world, bringing in that critique Christianity close to some forms of Gnosticism. There's a provocation there. It's like, why this recommendation and what does it mean and how do we attempt to fulfill it without falling into that Platonism that longs for disembodied perfection or completion?
Right. In the language of this book that I mentioned in our other conversation, Sojourners.
Yes.
Strangers in a strange land. Right? That whole sensibility. What does it even mean to be in that way in the world?
Yes. The Stranger in a Strange Land, of course, is evoking the mythology of the Exodus and of Moses. But Zachary Stein describes us as in a time between two worlds, which is an Exodus. He's invoking the Exodus mythology. We're moving. That to me is a very interesting thing. Right? So there's the sense of Exodus, which carries with it a sense of moving towards. There's a liberation, a freeing from and a freeing to. That's different from this, although it feels similar. When you've traveled to Borneo and you just feel out of place and you're just experiencing culture shock. And I think Jesus in what I quoted, speaking on behalf of Jesus, is always a worrying thing.
Whoa, okay, got it.
Yeah.
So I should say, hey guys, be in the kingdom of heaven, which is a place. Now, I don't mean like Borneo, but it's a place where one can be. It is a location the being can occupy. And it has a relationship with other kinds of place.
Is very much the aspirational move between being how we exist and how we could exist in a way that more fully discloses the nature of our being, where that doesn't mean something just inside me, but also something between me and other people. So the kingdom of God is within you, but it also can be translated as the kingdom of God is between you. And then, of course, in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus famously says, the kingdom of God is spread upon the world, but men see it not. So it's not really another place, it's another way of being in this place.
There was a few that popped up that I thought were fun to throw into the...
Yeah, let's enrich the phenomenology.
Into the crucible, not the fire. One was the very, beautifully banal and even profane metaphor of just the simple notion of radio.
Yeah, okay.
Kingdom of 99.5 is at hand, but nobody's tuned into it. Right? There's a way of thinking about a way of being in relationship with something that is somehow called invisible or not yet currently part of your experience, but part of the potential of your experience. That's the point, right? It is what may not yet exist.
Yes.
It's simple as that, right? The transition between isness and existence is this middle zone of something like relationality, proper relationality, harmonic relationality, attunement, something like that. The other phrase that came up, which may properly belong to Nietzsche, but I don't know, is to become an artist of life. To make a very clean distinction between the art and the artifact. Right? The artifact lives already at the level that it exists. Right? The painting exists. If we look at the art in the way that a bear looks at the painting, right? That ain't art. It's actually the continuity, connection with something of the manifestation of the logos, but it's the connectedness. The whole point is the connectedness. Connectedness that gives rise to the presencing of this existence as art in the first place.
Bringing the existential into attunement with the essential so that the essential is more and more disclosed. And you linking that to the attunement that discloses the art within the artifact. And where I see those two coming together, if I can just put quick labels on them, the existential and the aesthetic, is in Jesus' use of parable to reveal the kingdom of God. you know, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, right? And you get all these things, and what they do is they reach me in my existence, but they call me to my essence, right?
Yeah.
So, right, they're in the world, but they're not of the world, right? In that sense, they're designed, and the koan does the same thing. It reaches into my categorization by means of which I make sense of the world, but it calls me beyond that, right? And this is a proper property of all symbols. This is some of Tillich's work on a symbol. They have a particular aesthetic to them, because they have to be able to reach deeply into our existence, our current everyday framing, and simultaneously call us deeply beyond it to what we could be in our aspirational essence, call us to our second self and be called by the second self. So there's something here also about, there's a deep connection between parables and being sort of epistemic existential nomads, if I can put it that way. Epistemic existential aesthetic nomads in a certain way. The kingdom of God is a parable, right? And the Exodus is a parable, right? In that sense. Yeah, I'm just going to use metaphors, but it's the metaphor that's used is waking people up. Because when you wake people up, you're able to do something that reaches them in their sleep and then calls them into consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. That's what the awakening of Buddhism, right? That's one of the advantages the awakening metaphor has over the enlightenment metaphor. The enlightenment metaphor is I just turn on the light, but the awakening metaphor is no, I do something that can reach you in your sleep, in your unconscious, and call you into consciousness.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just giggling at the degree to which the invention of the electric light bulb really screwed the enlightenment metaphor.
Yes, it does.
Before the electric light bulb, enlightenment was a whole different notion, right? It's like basically the sun comes up. Like that's how you get enlightened, is the sun being up. But now with the electric light bulb, you're like, wait, why can't I just take some acid? Can't I be enlightened? No.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, sorry. This gets
no. One of the things that comes out of the Exodus mythology that might go towards answering the awakening and why this is so important is the fact that the Israelites keep forgetting. They keep forgetting that they were called out of Egypt and all of this stuff happened, right? And I'm not taking that as a historical event. I'm just saying, but within the myth,
just be a human right now. All you have to be right now is we all constantly seem to be forgetting. Like it's crazy how forgetful we are.
Yes.
So it's not, clearly it's not just the Jews in Exodus who were pulling it off. That was just a realistic depiction of how human beings happen to be. You can just imagine, it's like, wait, guys, look, we saw a complete straight up miracle like a weekend ago. Really? Come on. Yeah, totally. Levity. Nietzsche named it quite nicely.
Yeah.
Right. There's a moment where we are governed by gravity.
Yes.
And we have a Sisyphean task when we are governed by gravity. We're constantly having to put effort into pushing the rock up the hill.
Yeah.
The fundamental characteristic of the world we live in is when the rock rolls down the hill.
Yes.
There is a different world where we are governed by levity. This is the challenge. Not be good at lifting rocks uphill, but to become governed by levity, to be fundamentally living in a world where levity is the nature of reality. That's a very different sensibility.
Come to me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, for my burden is light. There's that paradox in Christianity of, you're following Jesus unto death, but nevertheless, he's offering the lightest yoke of all in some way. I get what you're saying. The Myth of Sisyphus is, I think, one of the great philosophical essays, and what Camus is doing there. And he's basically advocating a profound kind of existential stoicism, right? Sisyphus becomes happy because he appropriates the fact that he defines the meaning of the event, not the event. But you offered something different. You pointed to a different thing, which is, no, That's all great, and at times we have to, and the stoic response to the heavy rock is better than the nihilistic response. Yes, but then you said, but Nietzsche says, no, but what if I could just turn off the gravitational constant, right? and we moved into a different world. There's a sense in which the kingdom of God is supposed to be exactly that, right? It's supposed to be that kind of change rather than, you know what, let's be really heroic at pulling up all the rocks on all the hills of reality, right? But instead, right, no, we can, there's something else in which we've fundamentally changed, right, the defining constants and parameters of our of reality for us.
When you're below the line, you're in suffering, which is that you're in a world governed by the gravity of reality.
Yes.
And you can be heroic, but you're in the world of suffering. And I mean this from a first-person experience.
Yes.
And there's a way, I've experienced this again countless times, of being above that line. And when you're above the line, you're not in the world of suffering. And what that means is that every event that occurs does not leave suffering. Right? It's not like things are cool. It's not like you're living in sort of happy funlands. You're not living in Disneyland. You're living in the same exact reality. But what's happening in your experience is now coming from a completely different location.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it leaves no mark. You are in fact moving smoothly or fluidly through life. So the point of this particular story is that's the thing. Like you can be in this place that is above or not in the realm of suffering, and it has the characteristic, the feeling of levity. Now, the experience I've had, as I've said, obviously, is I don't live up there all the time, or even most of the time.
Yep.
Some of the time, enough of the time to know that it's there, and to be really curious and then frustrated and suffer by the fact that I'm not there all the time, which is a really complex problem.
Yes.
Which is why you have to approach it through paradoxes and koans and stuff like that, because you can't involute the Sisyphean task, right? It can't be the way you get above the line is you become really Sisyphean about getting above the line. Like that's very bad. Don't go there. That's a really rough spot to go.
That's very well said. Okay, this is really sparking for me.
Yeah.
Right, there's a difference between objects and hyper-objects. Objects are contained. Hyper-objects are not contained. They are distributed, and they can only, and this is the ecclesia, the church, they can only be held by distributed cognition. It's kind of like there's a, right, you need something that can be non-localized in space and time in order to come into right relationship to things that are held together, like the way the hyper object is by its internal relation, its self-organization, rather than any kind of containment. And the kingdom of God is, in that sense, there's a kind of hyper object, if I can put it this way, that we're not realizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mindset endeavors to respond to it and relate to it in the mode of containment.
Then you can't do it.
Always can't do it.
The core of dialectic is not logic. The core of dialectic is getting you to think in a non-thingly way.
Yeah.
So that you can see, you can see the forms, being able to realize things in a non-thingly way, a non-containment way.
This is a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. We're not like saying, here's a way where order is over here, where I can sort of define numbers and time and space and measure and do physics. And here's something over here, which is completely bogus. Who knows what's going on? It's impossible. No, What I'm saying is, here's one way where order shows up. Here's another way where order shows up. They're different ways, but they're not, it's not like chaos and order. It's actually like, no, it's different, completely different modes of order. Like you said, you can see the forms.
Yes.
It's not by virtue of the existence. It's by virtue of a different mode of perception. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Web 3. And in Web 3, the word vibes is a term.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me before. Yeah, please go on.
And what they're discovering in this world, and in this world also I think just includes Gen Z in general, not just Web 3, is that vibing is a thing, and it's a way, it's a mode of relating. And the way I'm vibing with vibing is it's the properly aesthetic mode. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you know that a particular note is the appropriate note to follow a given note. If you don't have musical notation to tell you, right, you're vibing. Right?
Yeah.
It has a feeling of rightness. The same thing with an artist. I've talked to many artists about just like watching my wife create art. Like, how do you know that that's the next move of the nib of the pen?
Yeah.
And I can assure you, it has nothing to do with computation. Right? It's a vibe. It's a feeling. Right.
Yes.
The point is a revalorization of quality, a revalorization of feeling,
Yes.
a revalorization of the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would put it precisely that to bring narrative in service to aesthetic rather than the other way around. The first basis is vibing, which is to say orienting towards the qualitative and the intrinsically infinitesimal, which we say the eternal being, and the modality of being is the aesthetic, the artistry, art.
Yeah.
And we can then we bring that, and that is our sort of basis. Now we're perceiving the forms, we're operating in the order of being, and then we can bring semantic, we can bring the narrative, which is what's happening right now, in service of that, to clothe it into a fashion that makes it more realizable and more shareable to other embodied beings in the shared space of reality. Now we're doing something. Right? Now everything is in the proper order, and we can begin to step into this new place well.
And that making narrative in service of the transcendent, that's the parable then. That's what what a parable is exactly doing. You bring a narrative in, and you make a narrative that undermines narrative tropes in order to try and, I like this idea of vibing, and I like the idea of beauty. There's a huge rediscovery. I want to pick up on that because that there's a connection between beauty and levity that we need to unpack, because it feels to me like these two are related. How do we vibe with the transcendent? And I take it, I agree with you. All of that is well said in what you've just done. But the problem still remains, how do we grok that? How do we vibe with that? And this has something to do with beauty and levity being together. That is not the longing for disembodied perfectionism.
Okay. So the first thing I would say is that my sense of it is that if you are properly in the place where you are in fact vibing with being, that notion of that kind of a Gnostic rejection isn't what's up. Quite the opposite, exactly the opposite. And I'll make pause there a little bit about beauty and levity, which is as you, when you mentioned it and I contemplated on it, it's like, okay, one of the things I definitely notice is when I personally am above the line, beauty is everywhere.
Yeah.
Levity is not an instantaneous release. This is the opposite of the Gnostic projection. It's not an instantaneous release from a shitty ass world into a momentary point of perfection. It's rather how being in relationship with the eternal allows one to have a levity, meaning, yes, it is beautiful. And there's a way of moving into the world that is in service to the eternal, is in service to the creative principle, that is rightness no longer needing to explain itself, right? That's the point. You don't need to have justifications and rationalizations and kind of good reasons. It's just what's supposed to be done. Just the exact answer. How do you answer? Why is this note the note that follows? If you're listening closely, it's kind of obvious. Right? It's obviously the thing that's supposed to be happening. If you're vibing well, right? And there's a way, and then people will be kind of like, if everybody's sort of vibing together, that can again make it kind of the classic jazz band story that we use. Yeah. There's a shared felt sense of, yeah, that's more beautiful. And where we were before was perfect, and now we're perfect too, but more perfect. Okay, and then pausing back. So the Nietzsche thing is, my experience of the Nietzsche thing is there's always a double move that's involved in this problem, right? It's like there's something in the heart, there's something in the soul, right? There's something in the one who seeks to escape first. And rather than truly entering into grace, right? I guess that's the word you would use, or would be used, and truly entering into a realization of the eternal. What they do is they produce a simulation of the eternal. They then clothe themselves in it so as to avoid taking responsibility for the thing that's happening in them.
Yeah. The theory of resentment.
The theory of resentment. Yeah, precisely. And it's all too easy, right? It is just all too easy to participate in the forgetfulness, grasp the art at the artifact, and then become skillful at producing the artifact and presenting that as being art.
Yes.
And this is then the reciprocal closing. Right? This is sort of the game that we constantly find ourselves in, is that point.
Yes.
So I noticed myself contemplating, why isn't it easier? Like what's exactly happening? Because, as they say, it's at hand. And for a very long time, there's been a lot of people saying more or less the same thing about this thing. And yet here we are.
So I have a partial answer to that. And it has to do with confusion. And I'm really relying on the etymological origin of the word. Fused together. We set up a dichotomy between appearance and reality because we are sometimes deceived, misled. We suffer from illusion and deception. So that is a very adaptive and useful thing to do. The problem is, once you open up the dichotomy, you're now in the hell of that chasm. Right? But what we have to realize, and what Plato seems to be arguing in the Republic, is it's not the absolute versus the appearance. It's that the notion of the absolute actually includes both. What he means by that is that there are appearances that disclose themselves as appearances of reality. And that is the experience of beauty.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Wow.
Right? And so I'm taking it that what you're saying in the mode of levity is you are sort of optimally gripping the relation between appearance and reality, so that reality is always shining through the appearance, but the appearance is always reminding us that reality withdraws beyond how we currently grasp it. Right? That's beauty. That moment of simultaneously shining and withdrawing that realigns appearance and reality back together for us.
Like it has two distinct characteristics to it. One characteristic is an orienting basis. Ah, yes, that's the way. Right? Beauty tells us which way to go. If you're perceiving things in the direction of beauty, yes, there's no to that. Yes, go that way. And in the sensibility of nutrition, it actually provides, right? It's the notion of levity itself, right? The idea of levity is like there's an uplifting, it's an upwelling, right?
Yes.
To be in connection with beauty, you are both oriented in the right direction and provided the capacity to continue on that journey. Seems like that's a very good thing to do. Part of the challenge we deal with is the utter catastrophe of civilization. In that which should be giving us the highest quality signal is constantly jamming us with wrong signal. Even the simplest thing, when your newborn child first opens her eyes, it's truly shitty architecture.
Yes, and bad lighting.
Not beautiful.
Yep.
Not beauty. The first experience. And then for thereafter, almost continuously, not even the richness of the ordinary developmental environment of Homo sapiens sapiens, right? Not even trees and leaves and plants, but 80-90% of the time, arbitrary straight lines, bad colors, bad lighting, bad air, concentrated toxins, fill in the blank, right? Exodus is not a metaphor. Sad to say. The likelihood that you and I make it to the promised land is pretty close to zero, other than the fact that the promised land is always here, which is a good thing to keep in mind.
Yep.
But to cultivate and constitute a felt sense, like there's a Sisyphean task in front of us for a while. To create a context whereby the governance of levity is the case will be embodied in our grandchildren or great-grandchildren to the degree to which we consciously cultivate a developmental environment that is so fully in alignment with the natural best case for humans that we begin to give rise to humans who are just vastly more capable of easily being above that line that I talk about.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good ballast to our sails.
Yeah, exactly. It's good ballast to our sails.
Yeah, I think that's deeply right. Part of where our work overlaps is the idea that the meaning crisis prevents us from making the shift into the levity mode that is needed in order to get us into the place where we are capable of addressing the meta crisis.
We've talked about this even in our very first conversations. Like, we're in a unique location in the history of history.
Yes.
We really do have to get off this cycle.
Yeah.
So that's this is kind of one of these things where you'd like to be, and I don't know if I have any belief in this, but you'd like to be in a place where there's a way of being able to preemptively look at it and go, whoa, we'd like not to go there, as opposed to being on the other side of it going, how can we avoid doing that again? It's more of a, can we not go there? Can we steer clear of that? Can we preemptively recognize that as a super not good place to go?
Okay. Part of the way in which civilization is further toxic and further opening up the hell chasm between appearance and reality is the virtual layering that we're not putting on top. But there is a possibility of using the virtual to disclose the promised land, and that would be the beautification of the virtual.
Yes, exactly. You got it. That is it. Are you familiar with this story of the thing that's being called sometimes the metaverse?
I think so.
It's funny. It's exactly what we've been talking about. The bad version of the thing, virtual.
Yep.
Metaverse, I don't like that way of using it, but I'll use it that way now, is the Nietzschean critique.
Yeah.
Hey, let's make a completely simulated world, crawl into it, and die.
Yeah.
Basically, that's all it is. But the beautification.
Yes.
Herein also lies the possibility of our salvation. Now I have to revalorize. I don't mean Mark Zuckerberg's version of virtual reality. I categorically identify that as bad, should be extinguished by whatever means necessary. What I do mean is, can we be a we that is strong enough to steer this thing in that direction so that this evolutionary process, the unconscious habitus of the algorithmic mind operating outside of an awareness, and that's that path, and in that direction leads towards certain doom, or can we steer in this direction?
Yeah. Like, what's the difference between sensate pleasure in salience, and beauty? Because those are confused.
Love it.
Yeah, and so we could come
Absolutely.
back and follow up on that. How do we vibe with the transcendent